So I'm going to cut to the chase here. I have a group business coaching intensive program that is open now. It will start in early April, and it is a 7-week program. It's one of the lowest investment programs that I offer. And it's an amazing group coaching program designed to help get your business off the ground. Whether or not you have a business or you're already in business and you just want more clients, doesn't really matter. This program is designed for both people without a business and people with a business. But if you feel stuck and you feel that you are having trouble getting in clients or don't know what to do next or don't even know where to start, then this program is for you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Medicine for These Times. I'm so happy to finally be connecting with Dr. Kat Meyer. Hi, Kat. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, it's my pleasure. I'm so happy to.
I was just telling Kat, it's been interesting what always happens in the field. Right before this interview, just in the last few days, I have been either sent or told about personally multiple interesting stories about sex in the psychedelic space. So it's no coincidence we are speaking now. We'll get into it. This is going to be a good, juicy one. And I'm so excited to be finally connecting with you here. So Dr. Kat Meyer is a licensed psychotherapist specializing in sex, trauma, and psychedelics. She's also a combo facilitator, author, teacher of yoga, and international speaker dedicated to evolving the relationship we have surrounding sexuality and our bodies. Dr. Kat's clinical work with psychedelics combines her skills and knowledge of trauma, sex, and energy psychology. She approaches the work with her clients from a multi-layered and spiritual perspective for powerful activations and transformations. She's also the founder of sexloveyoga.com, an online platform integrating various schools of thought, including science, tantric yoga, indigenous ceremony culture, and psychology, designed to help people create a deeply fulfilling, prosperous relational and sexual life. As an expert and published researcher on the topic of sex, Dr. Kat sees clients in her private practice office in Beverly Hills and leads workshops, lectures, and retreats internationally. She is the host of the podcast Sex, Love, Psychedelics and Erotically Wasted, author of the book Sex, Love, Yoga, and co-founder of Undone Women's Sensual Yoga Experience. And you can check out her links right here in the show notes. But Dr. Kat, I've heard a bit of your story, but for those that haven't heard about it, how did you get into this as a, career? Sex, doctor, psychedelics, yoga, this online platform. It's been so interesting to watch the explosion in this, in the sex space, and then of course in the psychedelic space. But yeah, what is your background? And did you know you were going to be doing this when you were, 20 years old or a teenager?
Actually, I was 21.
21. Pretty good.
Yeah. So my background, I have some sexual trauma from when I was younger, then leading into eating disorders and depression as a child and into my adolescence. And I really struggled with relationships. So you've got some sex therapists who are just all about the sex, and it was never an issue. But for me, I was terrified of it. Relationships for me would last about a couple of weeks, and then I would have pure panic. And it was like this internal fear that they would find out that I was bad, that I was innately bad, And so I would shut them down. Any relationships that would move towards sexuality or touch, I would shut down, I would freeze, So I was 21 when I was reading a Red Book magazine, if you remember that. Yeah, aging myself. And they were quoting a sex therapist, and I was like, you can do that? And it was in that moment where I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. I want to figure this out. I want to feel differently about sex and around my body and relationships. I want to have relationships, romantic relationships. And so that's when I applied to grad school, and I dove in the academic route. And then along the way, I studied yoga, really dove into yoga, really felt this sense of like this extra piece of being able to calm my own body down and feel what that felt like. But then also like the spiritual aspect of yoga, to be able to give me this I didn't realize at the time, but this extra resource of power and of trust. Of course, that still took a long, like many years of doing that work. And then from there, I feel like I was just guided with what I was interested in. And it was only until retrospect that I was able to see how all these things interconnected. So ceremony work, metaphysical work, Reiki, energetic work, the yoga, the somatic therapy, like the trauma therapy. And it all just kind of like came together, the tantra, the BDSM. Like I dove into all of these things because I have a very strong part of me that's like, we're interested in, let's dive in, let's go in there and learn it all and then be able to weave it all together. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I can't wait to get into these topics because they're some of my favorites. I'm curious, when was your first psychedelic experience and how did that, play a part in, maybe your previous sexual trauma or, this path that you're on? I'm curious, like, did something come up for you or was it over a period of time?
Yeah, so I think I was 21 or 22. I think I was 22 when I tried mushrooms for the first time. It was in college. It was a beautiful Sunday, Easter Sunday with friends. Yeah. And having that first sense of awe, and the innocence. And I think I was in the grass with friends. We were putting sticks together and making a worm brothel. It was like this most innocent, playful, everything lifted. But then I didn't get into the ceremonial aspect of it until I was about 25 or 26. So after I had already been a student of Reiki and diving into the energetics and more of the mystical side, then I got into this ceremonial, and I think ayahuasca was the first one that I sat with. And so I tell this story about in that experience going into the bathroom and looking into the mirror. I was washing my hands and I look up and I made eye contact with myself. And then I just started touching my face and falling into the adorableness of myself and just be like, oh my God, I'm so cute. And I probably sat in there for a really long time, just like looking at myself and like petting myself and being like, I'm so cute, and it reminds me in retrospect of this practice that we do in Tantra of transfiguration, both, recognizing the divinity in something, but also the adorableness of something. Like true love and unconditional love is being able to look at a person and connect with how cute they are. They're so adorable in all of their parts, and this was like a embodied reference point of that, of like, this is what you're working towards. This is what self-love is, and the recognition of this. Now, can you go back outside and do your integration or do your work towards this? And I don't think beforehand I actually knew what I was doing all this inner work for. It was like an intellectual concept of self-love, an intellectual concept of self-divinity. But here was like, oh, okay. Now we just keep working towards coming back to that.
I can totally relate to this. I actually remember the first time where I had an awareness of like, oh, that's what true self-love feels like. Yeah.
Yeah.
On ayahuasca, it was, the same thing. It was in a ceremony. And I remember it was that same feeling of like, how do I have this all the time in the, the real world, the day to day? And it's not easy. It's really deep. And, so it's interesting. I personally have been on this path for a very long time, but in my, I don't know, I think it was my first year or year and a half of drinking ayahuasca, I met a place in my body that was storing. So I knew my mom had sexual trauma. It was incest. It was pretty bad. And, but I always thought I was fine, like, oh, that was hers. Even though I had known about epigenetics and understood, energy, and I just really didn't think it was mine until it came up in a ceremony and I actually met where it was living in my own sacral chakra. And that is what got me going back for more. And it's been a deep healing journey to really and I think I would like to believe it's healed now, who knows, but I'm curious, in the work you're doing, are you doing work like this, like on such a deep cellular level? Like, what is your viewpoint of how sexual trauma lives in our cells and our energy, our body, because, the reality is maybe it wasn't us, maybe it wasn't even our parents, but I mean, ayahuasca, all these psychedelics have showed me even generations ago. It's like if it happened in the family, maybe it happened in the family, eons ago. What is it? Yeah. What is your viewpoint on this? Because there's so many people coming to these medicines for deep healing now.
Oh my God, this is such a good question. And I see, so from my teachings, it's not that one of these things happens on one layer, energetic layer, like this, the physical, the somatic is related to the emotional, is related to the mental layer, related to the energetic layer. And these can be passed down through our, epigenetics, not just the cellular level of like disrupted mitochondria, but also the burdens of the beliefs that we carry from our ancestors, from our mom and her mom and her mom and her mom, but also the, how our body holds on to these as well. So oftentimes when I'm working with clients, they are carrying the burdens of these lineages. And so they may or may not have experienced sexual trauma in this life. But then when they're in the space of the psychedelics, they will see how long that line goes. Some of my clients who have a history or who have a family lineage in the Middle East or who have a Black history, sometimes I'll see that. They will see that. And so they'll be visited by their ancestors in that space, or they'll be able to see the whole line of where that comes from, and then to be able to associate some of their own fear responses that weren't their own because it didn't happen to them in this lifetime, but the way that their mom treated sex, the way that their mom shut down their vitality because they felt that their expression was dangerous because of what their mom had experienced. And so we can shut that down in our own selves and have, block our own access to that for our safety, but not because we perceive that, because our mom perceived that. And then when we can recognize what those are and unblock those or unburden those from ourselves, we can access what's called the golden shadow. Carl Jung talks about the golden shadow, and it's these parts of ourselves that we would identify as positive or lead to our vibrancy or our wholeness, but we've suppressed them for our own survival. And so I see that a lot of times when they're from family lineage. Yeah.
Oh my God, this is such a deep subject. It's just so funny. I even went last night to this, I don't know, it was like some kind of tantric practice. It was blindfolded. It was very innocent, clothes on. Mm-hmm. And it was so funny because in 1 hour, I was like, wow, every single one of my core wounds just came up in like 1 hour. And I could notice them and track them and just laugh. But it's just so deeply rooted in so many people, and what do they say? Like 1 out of every 4 people has had some form of sexual abuse, or maybe it's more.
If not more, yeah.
I'm curious, like, what have you, in your practice, especially, let's say the last few years, there's a lot of intensity and the energies seem to be moving in the direction of people seeking, alternative healings or healings with medicines, or, people willing to do this deeper work. But what do most of the people come to you for? Like, what is alive out there in the field of the realm that you work in?
Yeah, I've been doing the sex therapy work for 13 years. So I've seen a whole gamut of different challenges. Most of the time what I get is sexual trauma, men, women, and other genders. I see a lot of that. I see a lot of individuals who want to explore an openness or polyamory. And so I get a lot of that, either people who are curious or people who have tried it, shit hit the fan, and now they need help from a knowledgeable and non-judgmental space. And then I also get individuals, this is a pattern that I've been seeing recently, is women coming in who are feeling like they're coming into their sexual self. They're discovering who they are sexually, and they're running up against the fear of their male partner who is afraid that now she's stepping into this, knowing what she wants, that she's going to leave them. I have seen this so many times recently. And I think a part of that is because there's more knowledge, there's more sex educators out there, there's more of the conversation around sexuality, and it's piquing the curiosity of someone, being like, oh, it doesn't have to be this way. There's something that I can feel differently, or I don't want to feel suppressed anymore, this low, or somebody just turned me on outside of my relationship. Why do I feel this way in my body? I feel this tingly. I feel this like urge to want to go and do that with that other person. Okay, what's going on here? And so it's like waking up these feelings inside of our body, and we're following the curiosity rather than just shutting it down. So that's been really interesting. Or also a lot of people, there's a lot more people who have been curious about BDSM lately. I've seen so many people now wanting to become dominatrixes or wanting to tie each other up. And I'm like, yes, I've been waiting for this moment all my life and for everybody to join me in that space, the sacred kink. And yeah, so I think psychedelics also help us there. Psychedelics helps us to redefine what reality is, what conscious awareness is. They help us to break through the confines of how we self-identify, but then they also help us to redefine what sex is. Like, how many people have had a full body orgasm in ayahuasca or with psilocybin, and then they're like, what is this? And I just had the best sex of my life with 5-MeO and nobody even touched me. So it's cracking open this culturally defined idea of what sex is. And then what do we do that? Where do we put that in the file folder of what we understand our life to be? We can't, because it doesn't fit there. And so we've got to go somewhere. And now we start asking the questions.
I love this. It's like everything is being reprogrammed. It's happening. Because it's been fascinating, just even my own journey, and then working with clients for years. And I'm not even doing anything in these realms, but I've had a lot of clients, in the tantra, sacred sexuality, a lot of clients working in the trauma space, and these things surface.
Yeah.
And it is very interesting to see how psychedelics fit into this. This is why I was telling Kat, in 2019, I actually posted on Facebook, I'm like, who's talking about sex and psychedelics out there? And back then, I think I was given like 2 names. So I'm really glad you're out there talking about it, because I had even noticed, okay, well, some thoughts are coming up, and I know there was programming that was given to me by my family, by this society, this world, and there's all these other ways, and there's more and more people out there, very public and being empowered by it, let's say the non-monogamy and polyamorous space, but so much more beyond that. So I'm curious, where does psychedelics fit into this work that you're doing? Is it, I'm sure people, or maybe it's just me projecting, all I can think is like, oh, maybe she just gives MDMA to couples and like sits there and hangs out with them. But is it is it just MDMA, or is it something else, or is it you doing psychedelic therapy, or people doing it on their own? I'm curious, like, what's the work you do around the psychedelics, and what else is happening out there in this kind of sex psychedelic world?
Yeah, so clinically, because I'm a licensed therapist, I work with ketamine. And ketamine, I think a lot of people look at that and they're like, that's not sexy, or I can't have sex on that. Like, my dick goes down, or whatever. I don't know. Or I can't find my body. But again, redefining what sex is. And when I was in my ketamine assisted therapy program, we were doing the experiential with lozenge. And I was like, my intention is to see how I can use this for sex therapy. And I went into the experience, and as the ketamine started coming onto my body, I was like, okay, can I find my body? Okay, I can feel my body. It feels light. I feel, like this expansiveness. And then I was like, okay, can I connect with my pelvis and my pussy? And I was like, ooh, I can feel it. Okay, what happens if I start breathing and moving my body like I do in my tantric practices? And I started doing that, and I shot into a full body orgasm. and my whole body was shaking and shivering and just, rolling with that energy. And so now we come into the integration circle, and this room is full of doctors and therapists and other practitioners. And everybody looks at me and they're like, okay, we want whatever you had, right? And it drops me into the reminder that, in this space, in the ketamine specifically, it is energetic experience of our eroticism, and it reminds us that sex can be energetic, and that if we lift the heaviness of depression or anxiety for somebody to be able to be in their bodies or with their bodies in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be able to because of trauma or because of these chronic pain or challenges, it can help them to realize that they can access the energy of sex, that it doesn't have to be the physical aspect of it. So can that help them redefine that? And I've had clients who are trans and who do not want to be in their body because of the dysmorphia, and then realizing that they can turn themselves on, or they can access pleasure still in a safer way, in this way. And then to be able to work backwards from that, and then getting into tantra, and then being able to integrate with energetic experiences instead of just the physical functioning of their body. And then in my clinical office, it's using breath and sound and instruments to help people to feel and connect. And I use lower to medium dose of lozenge, so somebody can still connect with their body. I'm not giving them high IM or IV to shoot off somewhere. I want them with their body. And so their body and with the energy of it. And so so many times clients have been able to connect with the pleasure, or to connect with their body in a kinder, safer way, or to be able to recognize the blocks that are preventing them from being able to maintain an orgasm or erection or libido. And this is any genders. So I can see it in that way to be really powerful. Then I also help individuals with the preparation, the education, and then the integration of exploring with psychedelics, whether it's psilocybin or MDMA or otherwise, to help them to be able to safely, ethically, consensually explore in that realm, and then how to integrate and create a plan out of that. So I know people are experiencing or experimenting with these different psychedelics, but there's a lot of harm that's happening. People who are getting hurt, people who are getting violated, and then also people who are experimenting with it, having the best sex of their lives, but then not knowing how to actually change their sex life. They're just having a great time on it. But it's like, okay, but now we can take that even deeper and see what you learned in that experience, and then integrate it in your everyday sex life, so you don't keep having to outsource it to drugs and psychedelics to get to that space, but you can actually have psychedelic sex outside of a medicine.
That is it. Because it's interesting. I actually just released an episode with someone who does some ketamine, and I told him I don't actually platform a lot of people who just do ketamine therapy, because I know it's great for certain things, but I am more about embodiment and really feeling and getting into the feelings and bringing it into the integrated body that's human, that's here on earth, and not so much the dissociation, which is great what you say. And it's fascinating. I've never even thought about that you could actually work with ketamine to actually train yourself to feel more, because it is so easy to just turn into the blob and lose it all. And but I'm so glad you just said what you said about learning how to actually work with your body to bring this into your everyday experience, because I have seen this. It's been challenging being in this space, in the psychedelic space, and the kind of the festival community, the community. Everybody's like, oh, it's psychedelic forward, but at the same time, I have met people that really do depend on only being in an altered state to have a great relationship or great sexual experiences. And I'm like, well, is that really the answer? Same with ketamine, even, people needing ketamine once or twice a week just to have an everyday life, I have a lot of mixed feelings about that, because I really believe it's, these medicines are here to help us, get into our body and learn, like you said. So thank you so much for sharing about this. And wow, I'm pretty blown away. That is incredible. But let's speak a little bit about, this kind of darker side that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been interesting. I had something happen a little over a year ago where I asked people on Facebook about a particular kind of transgression with a therapist, and like falling in love with your client, which there's definitely ethical boundaries. The psychedelic space in particular hasn't really established concrete ethical boundaries yet, because it's still very underground. Of course, if you're a licensed therapist, there are. I do have to say it was interesting. It was one of the probably my most popular Facebook posts ever. The amount of comments was just incredible. But the comments ranged from like, no, this should never be like this, to let humans be humans and do whatever they want. And it's and I've actually struggled with this too, in the psychedelic space. I don't know. I mean, it's like, well, who's to say what's right or wrong? Maybe it is okay if someone falls in love with someone on MDMA and then they end up together the rest of their life. I don't know. But how do you navigate this? And like, what do you recommend to people, especially, by the way, there's a lot of underground people who, there's sexual trauma comes up unexpectedly very often. What are your views on what's happening in the medicine space? Because it is getting weird, and there's more and more stories every day, and
Yep. Beth, I am going to be so blunt with this answer because I feel so strongly about this as a trauma therapist who has also been in this space. The question here, first of all, is, are we recognizing that there is always a power differential when there is a facilitator and someone seeking healing? So it is not an equal playing ground. And so what archetype are we as the person seeking healing looking at the facilitator as? As our savior, as our mother to come and nurture us and take care of us, as our father to come and protect us, to save us, to take us out of our pain? Are we looking to them and giving up our power? Are we selling them our power in exchange for the illusion of safety, or the illusion of love, or the illusion of something that we feel we aren't having or able to source for ourselves? And then the question to the facilitator, how are we seeing this person as something that is trying to heal our own selves? Or what are we asking them to step into for us? What are we getting from this? Oftentimes it's power. It's more power. Even as someone who is nurturing, you are in a power role of that you can offer to this other person. You can take care of them. You can save them. They look up to you, whatever it is. And so add sex or add love to this. And then the question is, what is love? In MDMA and in ayahuasca, we all can feel love. We can feel the vibration of it. We can feel the omnipresence of it. But then this is a human, and the human across from us, what are we projecting onto them? We do not have enough evidence. We do not have enough experience to be able to trust them or to know whether they're a right fit for a relationship. So our desire always precedes the amount of experience that we need with a person. And that can be enough to alter our discernment. So on both roles. Now, I don't want to put that responsibility on the person who is healing because they are vulnerable. It really falls on the responsibility of all the facilitators. What are you doing? What are you doing? Do your work. This needs to be clean. This needs to be clean so that the students, our clients have the space, the safety to project, to fall apart, to find their own selves. And we're here to hold a safe container that does not move, that is not, altered by that, so that they can find their own sense of self and containment and power, and then grow and move on. And so that's what I really want to emphasize. It's not safe if we're allowing ourselves to get into this and then say, well, I'm just being human. It's going to create, it already has created so much trauma, so much pain, so much. I was dating somebody at one point, and he called me from the airport and said, I have fallen in love with my shaman, and now I'm going to go be in a relationship with her. And I was like, all right, the irony of this, because I'm literally talking about this on podcasts, and here's some information from chakruna.org, about how sex and relationships and, end up in ceremony cultures. So I would love to put this wholly responsibility on facilitators. And unfortunately, we've got to educate the people who are seeking help too. I'm sorry, you should not be holding that as a responsibility, but let me tell you that, boundaries are important. Clean energy is important. And unfortunately, we see this a lot.
Wow. Classic, by the way. Classic that happened to you. Because I was telling Kat off camera, my former partner also crossed ethical boundaries, and I'm not associated with that person anymore. And it was very fascinating to be in that space to actually question, like, well, wait a second, what are the ethical boundaries? And and really, as I was telling Kat off camera, some people definitely from the sex positive, polyamory crowd that I'm friends with was like, they're all for humans being humans. And so I started to question, like, well, how do we know what's right or wrong? But yeah, if someone's coming to you for healing, especially, by the way, in the psychedelic space where there's a huge power differential, right? Then it's even more, enhanced and increased where, if there's MDMA or, even mushrooms or whatever it is, anything, it's like, it takes even more of this personal responsibility and thankfully the education. And it's been so fascinating working in this space, and sad, by the way, to see how much has come up. I mean, there's story after story. And even I was just telling Kat, even in the last week and a half, I've been sent a couple articles. I heard a couple firsthand accounts. I talked to someone 2 days ago. I mean, it's been, and I don't know what to make out of it other than, wow, it's sickening and it's scary and it's a wild west. And, the education around this is so important because, as you said, it's like there's this projection, there's transference, there's the power differential. And I think I personally don't even know if some of these training programs teach any of this. I think a lot of them kind of avoid this section because it's so sensitive. I'm curious, what are your experiences with that? Have you, because even my former partner, who is a somatic therapist, he had even told me he did a 4-year training program with 2 additional years, and neither program touched on sexual trauma, which I thought was a very strange, I know, isn't that weird?
That's so weird because so much of the trauma that we experience or that we see is sex related, which I think is an underservice to see, or a disservice to see how little is talked about and trained. I'm not saying everybody needs to become a sex therapist, but we do need to be able to do our own attitude reassessment to see what sort of blocks and barriers and projections and bias, and then our own internal needs that, we all have different relationships around sex. And for some of us, we use sex as a way to create safety or to create belonging or to create worth. And so if we're not doing that work with understanding our own relationship around it, it becomes dangerous. I had a colleague years ago, she published research on therapists who had sex with their clients, or developed relationships with their clients. And one of the contributing contexts was they were not getting their own sex needs met or their own self-worth worked on outside of their therapy. So they were doing that work through their clients, and that's so dangerous. It's really dangerous. And to speak to the individuals who say, let's let humans be humans. You know what? Yes, let's all be human. However, there is shadow that if we aren't doing the work to become conscious and bring into the light, then we're gonna, that's why all these things are happening. I'm not here to shame anybody, but if we aren't taking responsibility as the sexual revolution, the psychedelic revolution happens and continues to change and transform us, this causes chaos, and chaos can harm. Chaos can be beautiful and it can create, but only with the container of, holding knowledge, safety, presence in that as well.
Yeah. And thank you so much for educating people about this. I mean, I'm curious, in your experience, have you been hearing more and more of these stories from people in the medicine world, in the medicine space? And then also, I don't know, I've heard some mixed things about like the level of training that people are getting around even just the very like I'm a business coach and I know about transference, like even just the very basics. I'm like, do people even know the basics? But I'm curious, like, what are you witnessing out there in maybe the psychedelic space, or even the sexuality, or even the crossover of the two? Like, are you starting to hear some horror stories, or are you seeing people being properly trained? Or, I mean, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I am. And I've even had called people forward on podcasts even because of this. People who are telling me that they're dabbling in using ketamine and internal vaginal work and or body work, and being not having the proper etiquette for the consent, and understanding that ketamine and MDMA and some of these other psychedelics can increase the threshold of what we will tolerate or what we'll be okay with. We'll override our boundaries and then experience the trauma of our body afterward. I see this also a lot. I get clients who are in the poly open play parties, open swinger world, and use drugs or use psychedelics to override these boundaries. And then they're coming in and they're complaining about these UTIs, or they just start bawling and they don't know why. And then we back it up and we see they keep overriding themselves, but their body is remembering that there's something going on. Their body's reacting because you can overcome it in the mind, but then this was a line for a reason. Then I think with psychedelics, we can get into this space of like, I know the truth. I have certainty, it has that unique perspective of the mind to be able to make everything like, okay. And like, oh yeah, I've just been given the keys to the universe. I know that you and I were pharaohs and a queen in Egypt time. And so therefore we need to be together now. And like my sexual hands can heal you and whatever. And it's like that conviction piece is very scary too, because that's how people, especially people who are vulnerable, have sexual traumas or traumas in their background that make discernment really challenging, and they don't know what's right or wrong, or they can more likely follow somebody who has discernment, because discernment is powerful. It feels really certain. It feels really strong. And they're like, oh my God, you were touched by God. And like, God gave you this answer. So therefore, we need to do this thing. In the tantra world, in every single community, there is the person who takes this and takes advantage of vulnerable populations. And while there's no regulating bodies for underground, there is for clinicians or licensed clinicians. For underground, there isn't. So I think really it falls to the responsibility of community. Can community call forward people on their behavior and hold them accountable, rather than what I see over and over is people not saying something, people talking about it behind their backs, but not doing anything. And I think it reminds me of this psychological fear that we all hold of not belonging, or confronting somebody and then somebody dismissing us or minimizing or saying that we're wrong. And I have had that experience. I have confronted people in their sexual discretions and violations, and their responses back was, I was shaming them. I was not in loving kindness. I was projecting onto them. And I had to rally the community behind me and have multiple people sit this person down. At first, I crumbled, but then once I was able to find my own strength again, I called people forward, and they got to see the seriousness of this instead of minimizing and giving rationality of this person that is not. So it's like we over rationalize, we over be compassionate. We're like, oh, this person is just blah, 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 or oh, this is just love. But we've got to really be a lot more firm with this. When it comes to sex, when it comes to psychedelics, this is where it gets blurry and people can get hurt.
I'm going to send this interview to so many people, by the way, because it's very strange. I personally have actually gotten people booking calls with me to explore in my programs who then have come out and told me about transgressions. And it's, you know, it's been an interesting experience for me where I'm like, well, great, now I'm holding this. And, you know, do I bring it forward? I encourage them to bring it forward, but it's the exact thing you mentioned. It's the same story every time. You know, they were then told by the people they confronted that it was them, blah, blah, blah. I mean, and then there's the fear of losing livelihood. You know, a lot of times it's literally like it's their business, and their business is underground and it's referral based. And if they upset, you know, the one kind of ringleader in charge, or, you know, people interconnected to that person that's been sending them clients, they lose their livelihood. And I have now had numerous stories, you know, out there in this space around this. And it's like you said, it's how do we come forward, you know, community. There are some whistleblower publications and people out there that are, you know, telling the stories, but it's been challenging because there is no governing body. And then people really doubt themselves. And then, like you said, that deep fear of like, well, I'm going to lose my community, my friends, potentially my whole business. And then what? So then they're stuck in this place, and then they're traumatized, and then they're serving from trauma. And, you know, I know this is going to come up so much more. Your business is, you're already out there doing huge work. I'm like, this is going to blow up so big, because I keep wondering what's on the horizon with MDMA therapy. You know, we all know I think it's due out this year, or they keep saying it's this year. And I'm assuming it's, you know, trained therapists, but MDMA is a very powerful substance. You know, it's, of course you fall in love with everybody. You know, how do you feel that we can get this right? Like, is there, I mean, I do believe, humans, like there's ego and there's, you know, this is not new. It's right. It's like billions of years old at this point, but is there a possibility of us getting the healing powers of these medicines and sexual healing to people, and trying to also be human and get this right? Like, have you come up with any solutions? You know, like you said, community, but even then, like, how do we do this in community when people are living in such fear?
Yes. I believe if you are a facilitator or if you are a therapist, do not be a silo. Do not be doing this work by yourself. Have a group that you have consult with, like a consultation group. Have your own therapist or coach or somebody who is also helping you with your transference, your countertransference, your relationships around sex, your boundaries, your needs, so that you're not working on those through your clients unconsciously, unintentionally. And then I also really believe in the group model for therapy for many reasons, reasons of financial reasons, you know, because much of this work isn't affordable for, especially working with really good practitioners. You know, rightfully so, they're expensive. And so how can we make this more affordable? But also we can really learn from each other in these group models. You know, it decentralizes the power from just the facilitator and includes everybody as a wisdom keeper, their own wisdom keeper, that we can learn from each other. But then it also helps to create safety around the ethical aspects. I don't mean that it completely eliminates it, because transgressions happen in ceremony circles too, but it does reduce that. And so I think there's something really powerful and potent about that. As this relates to sexuality, I've been leading retreats for about 10 years now. And so I've seen group models in this be really, really beautiful, learning from each other, seeing reference points of this woman moving in this way, or this person sounding in this way, or listening to their story and being able to relate with it, and that being healing, or being witnessed. The power of being witnessed in your story, your psychedelic story, in integration afterward, or even, being witnessed in your story in the experience is really powerful. I also think it creates community. And if we aren't in community, it makes integration so much harder. And so if we bond in this experience together, and then we're facilitated or supported in that continuing on, then that can help us to be able to step into the version of ourselves, or step into the qualities and the story that we would prefer ourselves to be. I think that's really important. So right now I'm running ketamine retreats for women, and creating that model where they're connecting beforehand. There's prep work beforehand, as well as the retreat, as well as integration, and then coming up with plans to continue the work, because we know that it falls off with integration so much. And of course, like, integration is hard. Like, why do we want to keep doing the work, But like the psychedelic, the ketamine, the MDMA is the tool that we keep coming back to reference. And so having a plan to help us to be able to move through that, having a community to hold us accountable, having that, to extend beyond just the powerful experience is what we need. So I feel really strongly about, this group model, but also I've been building out like ways that people can integrate. I've got online programs. I've got monthly embodiment practices. I've got, these ways that people can keep the work going long after whatever experience that they have.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah.
And community has come up so much for years. And I think more and more people are seeing this, that we, no one's meant to do this alone. And when we do have that accountability, also, you mentioned the supervision. I think that's something that also, again, this is not regulated, but facilitators or people doing underground work need to have their own day-to-day practice, their own integration, their own guidance, someone to turn to as well. And this makes me wonder, if someone's maybe looking to heal their sexual trauma and maybe work with psychedelics, what are some questions they can ask the facilitators that they're going to? Because, of course, everybody says that they heal trauma.
Oh, my God. And, it's also interesting, too. I get DMs, questions from people like, hey, my friend just decided to be a facilitator of psilocybin. They haven't done any trainings, and I'm scared that they're doing this. What should I say to them? So I made a guide that helps people to vet their practitioners, and they can get that on my website, either sexloveyoga.com or sexlovepsychedelics.co, for that free guide. And it has these different questions to ask. And I think it's important for anybody facilitating to also ask those questions of yourself, so that you can make sure you're in integrity of both what you're selling and what you are, what you're, what's the word I'm looking for? Appropriate to hold, Yeah. In integrity of holding. Competency, that's the word I'm looking for, competent to hold. So what's their experience? What's their training in trauma? I think a lot of people are saying trauma informed, but you got to know what that means, because it's a buzzword at this point, and people are saying, oh, I'm trauma informed. They read The Body Keeps Score. That's not trauma informed.
I say they read Instagram posts.
Yeah, no. It's not. It's beautiful. These are great books, but it's to be called a trauma therapist or trauma facilitator or trauma-informed facilitator. That takes a lot of work, years of work. it's not just a month-long training that you take, because the nuance and the subtleties that trauma shows up in the body, the way trauma can be re-triggered, the way trauma can be prevented from actually changing. Like these are very real skills. You got to have deep presence if you're working with somebody with trauma, because it'll happen in a split second where if you're not catching something because you're in your own head or you're trying to analyze them, like you're going to miss it. So deep presence, deep attuning, checking your own stuff that you might be projecting onto them. Following your client rather than leading your client, letting your client have an inner wisdom that you hold, that you watch for, that you attune, that you support, but you're not leading them down something, you're following them. So it's, asking them about their training, asking them about their lineage of work, who did they study with, how long did they study with, what's the relationship with the medicine, do they have a consultation group supervision, what does that look like? And if somebody doesn't want to answer these questions, or they don't have an answer to this question, sit with your own self and see whether that works for you. Because I'm not here to say, tell you that you can't work with somebody, but just be consciously aware of what you're getting yourself into. And if we're going in to do this deep work, I personally want somebody who knows what the fuck they're doing, who can hold me in the most dissolved, falling apart, chaotic space and know that they got me.
Thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I agree. It's like deep discernment, people, really deep knowing yourself and knowing what you need and your boundaries. And, and hey, if you decide to work with someone that you're not 100% comfortable with, then know what you're getting into. But
feel your body.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trust your body and your feeling with them and how they're answering. Absolutely. Yeah.
I always tell this story. I'm like, the one time where I knew I should have walked out and I didn't, I regretted it, and
I had those too.
I think we've all been there at least once. But I'm curious to know, it's been interesting being in this coaching world for a long time and seeing the increase of, tantra, sacred sexuality coaches, and it's been interesting because, again, I always take this kind of Buddhist approach of like, who's to say what's right or wrong, and it's kind of scary. And I've had clients work in this space, and I've seen, people go to an a week of Easter and then become sex coaches the next day. Where is this all going? Part of me is excited because we're in this, big sexual revolution, this liberation of our, feminine power or just all, inner power that's sexual energy inside of us. But it's also sometimes very, hard. It's kind of like the psychedelic space. It's like, whoa, it's a lot. And I have friends who've been actually working in this space for a long time who are constantly calling out, the dime a dozen tantra coaches or, the transgressions in that world. But do you think there's something bigger happening here? Like, is this going in the right direction for the good of the planet? Like, where do you see this kind of, this world of sexuality going? And like, what does it all mean? Like, what is it a part of? I'm curious.
Such a good question. I love this one because this actually isn't new. We have seen this happen. In the recent history, we see a sexual revolution happen about every 50 years. So we can look back to the 60s and 70s. We can take it back to the Roaring 20s. We can take it back even further. There's whatever 50 years ago was before that. I'm not good at math. But we can see how these sexual revolutions happen. And a lot of people have free love and expansion. And a lot of this is also tied with, increase of psychedelics or substance use that causes this inhibition, people coming into more of their expression. And sexuality is aliveness, sexuality is our life force energy. And so we reduce the inhibitions and we have all of this. And some of this is chaotic too, and like chaos again can be creative. It can also be destructive if there's not the responsibility and the container and the knowledge and the support of that. All of these in the recent history we've seen come after a period of repression or a period of trauma in our collective world. If we look at the 60s and 70s, that came right after the war, and the 50s, they're very repressed, like very like I'm not going to use the word traditional roles, but more of like the set roles of how you're supposed to be, button up. And then recently we saw and then it got shut down again because of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, and then the same thing happened here. We had the pandemic happen, and a lot of people like their sexuality, more play parties, more psychedelic use. And so we're seeing that rise again. It's nothing new. And I think these patterns are going to continue to happen. We even saw this in ancient times, because there are accounts of fertility rites being used in ancient cultures, ancient Sumeria, Egypt, Greece, and seeing the rise of the use of psychedelics in these spaces and sexuality, or fertility rites for the fertility of land and whatever. We've seen all of that, and then we also saw that destroyed with the coming of like the Crusades, and the shutting down from the patriarchal and the religious cultures to shut it down. And so this isn't new. We've seen this. It's going to rise. I believe it's going to go through its cycle again, death and rebirth. However, just because that's what the collective world does doesn't mean that we on the micro levels have to do the same thing. Like, I think we can continue to open and not fall down into the cycle of repression again individually. Now, that does require us to be able to create our own container, our own self-regulation tools, our own conscious awareness of our patterns, of our shadows, of how we use sexuality. Why are we in this work? Just because you access your sexuality and you feel really juicy in your body does not mean that you then become a facilitator. Like, bless your heart. If that's what you want to do, okay. However, be in the contemplation of, why am I doing this? What are the parts of me that are getting met or needs met in being this facilitator, or identifying myself as this? I remember my therapist asked me that years ago. When I was working with him, he was like, what parts of you are getting your needs met through being a therapist, or being a trauma therapist specifically? And I had got to sit with, what is it in me that wants to hold the deep, dark depths of all these people? What am I getting out of this? And reality is, what am I getting out of this? And I got to meet a part of me that's deeply programmed to be in crisis with people, like develop relationships with people who are deeply in crisis, because it brought real pure presence. There's like a deep, strong presence with people who are in crisis, and they're right there with you, and they're like, you got me. So I got to do a lot of work around that and learn. Yeah. But like, if we're denying that, then we're missing a whole thing. And we're missing a whole thing, and then we're upset when we're not getting that from our clients, when we're not getting the whatever it is that we're outsourcing to them or to the world. So, like, if you're not willing to do your own shadow work, golden shadows and all, I'm not saying shadow work as in dive into the dumpster to dig out the heavy, dirty shit. Like, great, but also like just the wholeness of this, then we're doing a disservice, and we may fall right back into the cycle that I just talked about after the revolution.
Such great points. Oh my God, this has been an amazing interview, very timely too. So Dr. Kat, I want to leave you time to talk about, where people can find you. We do have your links here in the show notes, but what do you have coming up, and what's on your radar for the next, 6 to 12 months or so?
Yeah, so I do the ketamine retreats for women. That'll be in May. Will be this upcoming one. I work with a medical doctor as well. We have a great team, and incorporating a lot of like embodiment and connecting the relationship with the body. Then I also do monthly workshops called Undone for women, and it's really about undoing the negative messages around their bodies, using yoga, breath work, and dance. And that I believe as an integration tool for us. You know, again, we touch on these things, and then how do we keep that practice going? And then just really, I'm really focusing on building out uh, communities for integration. I think that's where we're missing in this world. A lot of people want to be facilitators, and they just want the person to have the breakthrough and then leave them. But I want to be like, okay, let's create the infrastructure for the continuing work, the integration. Yeah, that's what I'm most excited about.
Ah, and yes, I agree with that last part very much. It's like the facilitators are a dime a dozen, you know, not to diminish them. Some are
Yeah.
amazing. And it's not gonna, I always say it's useless without the integration.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice, but it doesn't really make the change. So, yes,
Yeah.
integration community, integration coaches, specialists, it's time. So, Dr. Kat, this was really amazing, so timely, so necessary. I'm going to be sending this to a lot of people. It's probably going to come up a lot. Might even have to bring you back on as we go deeper into the interesting wild west of the psychedelic space. But you know, I have a lot of faith that hopefully things are going in a more positive direction, and we'll see what happens. So,
Yeah.
thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. This was great.